When a new indie game launches, there's always the same question. Is this really worth playing, or is it just another forgettable experiment? Herdling arrived in late August 2025 with quiet anticipation, and within days, players began to speak. The verdict was surprisingly unified. This wasn't just another walking simulator. It was something more. Steam, the platform where indie titles either rise or sink, showed the first signs. Herdling quickly collected over 80 reviews, and an impressive 93% of them were positive. For a small, atmospheric game with no combat, no dialogue, and no multiplayer hook, that's a remarkable number. Reviewers praised the atmosphere, the soundtrack, and the emotional bond with the creatures you guide. They described it as short, yes, and simple, absolutely, but also beautiful, heartfelt, and memorable. One player summed it up perfectly. 3 hours long, but it stuck with me more than games I've spent months grinding. That's the kind of praise most indies can only dream of. Of course, not everything was glowing. Even in the midst of so much positivity, players pointed out rough edges. The controls felt clunky to some, especially when the herd doubled back or got stuck on obstacles. A few mentioned frame rate drops, particularly on the original Switch hardware, where performance dipped below 30 frames per second. Yet even those reviewers admitted that the flaws didn't ruin the experience. For them, Herdling's emotional pull outweighed the technical issues. That balance, between simplicity and depth, between flaws and heart, is exactly what has defined the early conversation around Herdling. The press noticed it too. IGN's Audrey Branch highlighted the unique herding mechanic, calling it a rare case where gameplay and theme align perfectly. Nintendo Life, reviewing the Switch version, praised the atmosphere and the music but criticized the herd for feeling less alive than promised, their personalities reduced to labels rather than meaningful behavior. Still, their conclusion was clear. Despite its imperfections, Herdling offered a memorable journey. Several outlets compared it to Okamotive's earlier games, Far, Lone Sails and Far, Changing Tides. Those games turned vehicles into companions, and Herdling does the same with living creatures. That shift made critics curious. Could the studio recreate the same emotional bond with animals instead of machines? Most agreed that it succeeded. Even if the mechanics weren't groundbreaking, the connection between player and herd felt genuine. At gaming expos earlier in the year, Herdling already stood out. Previews at Gamescom and the Future Games show drew attention to its hand-drawn aesthetic and its quiet, cinematic storytelling. Writers left intrigued by the balance of cozy exploration and tense moments, calling it a mood piece disguised as a puzzle adventure. By the time the full release landed, that sense of intrigue had turned into admiration. But perhaps the most interesting part of Herdling's reception has come from its community. On Reddit and Discord, the conversations haven't been about bugs or performance or whether the price was justified. They've been about the calicorns. Players share screenshots of their herds, each with names they've chosen. Some talk about how they lost a creature halfway through and felt unexpectedly devastated. Others share stories of feeding, cleaning, or decorating their calicorns, treating them not as game assets but as companions. There's even a running joke. Jim the Calicorn, a name so many people used that it became a meme. In one thread, players described the moment when Jim stumbled into a trap, and half the comments were condolences, half were playful jokes about protecting Jim at all costs. It's a reminder that when a game gives players the freedom to name and care for characters, those characters become part of the culture around the game. On YouTube, the comments under early reviews and trailers echo this same sentiment. People marvel at the art direction, at the cozy campfire moments, at the soundtrack swelling during a stampede across an open field. But above all, they keep circling back to the emotional core, the feeling of leading these beasts, protecting them, and forming a bond. That emotional connection has become the main selling point in word-of-mouth recommendations. This is also where Herdling fits into a larger pattern. Over the past few years, vibe games have exploded in popularity. These are titles where the focus is less on difficulty or mastery and more on atmosphere, story, and emotion. Journey helped set the template more than a decade ago. More recently, Jusant and Spiritfarer have shown how powerful this genre can be. Herdling clearly belongs in this lineage. Short, narrative-driven, immersive, and emotionally resonant. Players who enjoy that kind of experience have latched onto Herdling as the next must-play. It's being described as a perfect weekend game. 3 to 4 hours, easy to finish in 1 or 2 sittings, but memorable enough to talk about afterward. For people with busy schedules, or for those who don't want to commit to a sprawling 50-hour epic, that brevity is an asset, not a flaw. Yet the conversation around Herdling is nuanced. It's not hailed as perfect. It's not an indie masterpiece that redefines the medium. What people are saying instead is more interesting, that it's flawed, sometimes clumsy, but still deeply affecting. And in a way, that honesty may help it more than universal praise. A game that sparks conversation about what it does right and what it could do better often stays relevant longer than one that is simply labeled great. By the end of its first week, Herdling had already built a reputation as a quiet success. Not a hit on the level of Hollow Knight or Hades, but a title that stands out in its own niche. The numbers are small compared to blockbusters, but the emotional impact is huge. And for the players who have already walked alongside their herds, that's what matters most. What makes Herdling so fascinating is how divided, yet consistent, the impressions have been. No one calls it complex. No one calls it revolutionary. Instead, almost everyone describes it with the same handful of words. Quiet, emotional, simple, and memorable. That might sound like faint praise, but in a crowded market, standing out for tone and atmosphere is no small feat. For every massive RPG with branching narratives and endless quests, there are dozens of indie titles that vanish without leaving a mark. Herdling, despite its short length and modest scale, refuses to disappear into the background. Players talk about the way it lingers. They recall the silence of its world, punctuated only by the soft clatter of hooves, the rustle of leaves, or the distant cry of unseen creatures. They remember how the soundtrack swelled just as their herd broke into a stampede across a windswept meadow. They remember the weight of deciding who to feed first, when resources were scarce. Those small details, the moments in between, are what people carry with them after the credits roll. It's telling that Herdling has already inspired personal essays, blog posts, and community discussions about companionship and responsibility. For some, it became a metaphor for parenthood, guiding creatures who stumble, who get hurt, who rely entirely on you. For others, it echoed themes of leadership, of being responsible for a group that can't move forward without your care. These interpretations may not have been intended by the developers, but they prove how strongly the game resonates. Of course, not every player connects on that level. Some dismiss it as just another walking sim, frustrated by the limited mechanics. They argue that the personalities of the Calicorns don't go far enough, that they remain shallow despite being given names and traits. They point to technical hiccups, like clipping animations or sudden drops in performance, as evidence that the game doesn't reach the polish it deserves. For those players, the emotional hook simply doesn't land. But the fascinating part is this. Even those who criticize it often end up admitting they were moved. One reviewer wrote, "The controls are awkward, the puzzles are nothing special, but I still cried when I lost one of my Calicorns." Another commented, "It's short, too short, but I'd rather have 3 unforgettable hours than 30 forgettable ones." That contradiction has become part of Herdling's identity. It's not flawless, but it doesn't need to be. The press has echoed this theme. Nintendo Life, for example, pointed out the clunky herding controls and lack of depth in herd personality. Yet they also called the game a cozy, heartfelt trek that feels like a breath of fresh air. IGN praised its art direction and atmosphere while noting its simplicity. Across outlets, the consensus is clear. Herdling won't impress everyone, but for those who appreciate mood-driven experiences, it's unforgettable. And this balance, between praise and critique, may actually be what helps the game grow. It creates curiosity. When people hear that a game made them feel something powerful despite being flawed, they want to see for themselves. That curiosity fuels recommendations, social media posts, and YouTube discussions. It's not hype driven by perfection, but by genuine emotion. Looking at community reactions more closely, one trend stands out: attachment to specific calicorns. Screenshots flood Reddit with captions like, "Here's my brave one, saved from the cliff," or "This rascal just won't stop running into trees." Players share stories of how they named their creatures, how they decorated them, how they lost them, and sometimes how they managed to keep them all alive. These stories aren't about mechanics or graphics, they're about connection. Herdling has essentially turned digital animals into shared folklore within its community. It's easy to see why. The game intentionally gives players just enough space to project onto the calicorns. They're not deeply scripted characters, but they're small quirks: how they limp when injured, how they pause to nuzzle, how they gather around the fire, invite interpretation. And when you give players the ability to name them, to assign personality, those creatures stop being NPCs and become companions. That simple design choice has amplified the game's emotional impact far beyond what its budget might suggest. This is why so many reviews end up focusing less on gameplay and more on feeling. Words like cozy, emotional, melancholy, and gentle dominate the conversation. People don't say, "The puzzles were amazing," or "The mechanics blew me away." They say, "It made me feel something." For a medium often dominated by discussions of frame rates and mechanics, that kind of reception is refreshing. As Herdling settles into its place in the indie landscape, its future seems clear. It won't become a mainstream blockbuster. It won't dominate Twitch streams or spawn competitive scenes. But it doesn't need to. Its role is smaller, more personal, to give players a short, unforgettable journey, and to remind them that games can be about connection as much as challenge. In fact, Herdling's success so far mirrors that of other emotionally driven indies. Journey didn't need complexity to become legendary. Spiritfarer didn't rely on combat to move players to tears. Herdling, too, leans on atmosphere, music, and emotional weight rather than mechanical innovation. That puts it firmly in the tradition of games that prioritize meaning over mastery. So what are players really saying about Herdling? They're saying it's flawed but worth it. Short but impactful. Simple but unforgettable. They're saying that in a year crowded with massive releases, this small, quiet adventure managed to carve out a space in their memory. And they're saying that sometimes all you need is a herd of clumsy, lovable beasts to remind you why games matter in the first place.